Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to unpack complex ideas, pull out actionable insights, and, well, make sure you walk away really knowing your stuff. You've handed us a fantastic set of sources this time, all digging into something we all deal with: motivation. We've all felt that, right? That kind of invisible wall between knowing what you should do and actually doing it. So today, our mission is really to get past the usual tips and explore the surprising neuroscience, the deep psychological stuff that truly ignites lasting motivation. And more importantly, how you can actually use this for your own goals.
Yeah, and it's so much more complex than just wanting it enough.
Yeah.
What your sources show is that motivation isn't like an on-off switch. It's this dynamic, kind of delicate dance between our emotions, how we see ourselves, the world, and some pretty complex cognitive processes. We're going to look at why so many common tactics, just pushing harder, often just fall flat, and figure out what actually builds that sustained effort, that real engagement. It's a really rich area.
When that motivation slump hits, it really feels like a personal failure sometimes, like just a lack of willpower. But what really jumped out at me from your sources is that it's way more nuanced. That whole "I don't feel like it" sensation, it isn't some logical choice we're making. It's fundamentally an emotional state.
That's such a crucial point. For motivation to really kick in, our emotions need to line up with the task. Now, that could be positive, like, excitement for a new project, or even constructive anger driving change. The key thing is that internal consistency. When your feelings don't quite match what you're trying to do, that's exactly when you hit that "don't feel like it" wall. It's your internal system basically saying, hold on, mismatch here.
And here's where it got really interesting for me in these sources: how much our environment shapes this emotional alignment. I was genuinely surprised, actually, that some common productivity hacks, things we often rely on, might be making things worse.
They very well might be. Your sources explain that our brain has these two separate, often competing motivational circuits. You've got the extrinsic circuit that lights up for external stuff. Think deadlines, getting likes, money. Then there's the intrinsic circuit, which is powered by our own interest, curiosity, just the enjoyment of doing something. Now, the critical thing here, these two circuits actually inhibit each other.
Huh. Inhibit each other.
Yeah. So if we're living in a world that's constantly pushing external rewards, endless to-do lists, chasing social media approval, working only for the paycheck, we can, without realizing it, suppress our natural internal drive.
So hang on, are we saying external rewards are bad? Because, for a lot of us, deadlines, bonuses, even just getting recognized publicly, that's what gets things done, right?
Like,
how do we square that?
that's a great question. It's not that they're inherently bad, but it's about understanding their effect, their downstream consequences. Dopamine, which is so important for intrinsic motivation, for curiosity, it can get kind of overstimulated by constant, instant external rewards. Think social media scrolling, video games, even too much praise. This sort of flooding can actually deplete our brain's capacity for that self-driven, internally rewarding kind of engagement over time.
Ah, okay, so it's like it crowds out the internal stuff.
Exactly. So while external rewards can absolutely get us started, relying on them too heavily can sort of drown out our internal engine. The challenge then becomes, well, how do we protect and actually grow that intrinsic drive without pretending the external world doesn't exist?
Okay, so if nurturing that intrinsic drive is key, these sources point to specific psychological needs. When these are met, it's like fuel for behavior. This is self-determination theory, isn't it?
Precisely. And these aren't just nice-to-haves. They're framed as fundamental psychological needs. First, autonomy. That deep desire for freedom, for choice, feeling like we're the origin of our actions, not just puppets. Second, competence. The need to feel capable, skilled enough, to tackle things without feeling totally overwhelmed all the time, getting better. And third, connection. Our basic drive to belong, to feel valued by others, to be part of a community or group. When these three needs are consistently met, motivation tends to flow more naturally.
And when they're not?
Well, when they're lacking, like that example of Anton in your sources, who felt school was pointless because he lacked competence, autonomy, and connection, it leads straight to a motivation, just a real lack of drive. And this helps explain why relying only on extrinsic motivators, like Mary, who is just driven by external approval, why that can be so fragile, it's not sustainable.
Right, not sustainable. Okay, so if the external rewards and just gritting our teeth with willpower aren't the long-term answer, and these intrinsic needs are vital, where do we look? Your sources seem to really pivot inward then, towards our perception and our sense of self or identity, it feels like what we believe about a situation is almost more important than the situation itself.
It's quite remarkable, isn't it, how powerfully perception shapes motivation. Think about that classic example from the sources. Your desire to approach someone you like might be there all along, but your motivation skyrockets the second you find out the feeling's mutual.
Right. Nothing actually changed externally in that moment.
Exactly. But your perception of the situation completely flipped. Or consider that practical trick, just switching your phone display to grayscale. People report reducing screen time by up to 50%.
Wow.
You haven't deleted the apps, just changed one perceptual input. It drastically changes the motivation to pick it up.
That's amazing. Effortlessly changing motivation just by tweaking what we perceive. But it's not just about external things we see, is it? Our internal perceptions, what your sources call mental coloring or klischta, that also twists reality. I know I do this.
Oh, absolutely. We constantly layer our own emotional interpretations onto neutral events. Like, not getting a text back is objectively just the absence of a message, full stop. But how often do we instantly jump to feeling rejected or thinking the other person's annoyed or, creating a whole story around it?
All the time.
These distorted perceptions aren't just upsetting, they actively drain our motivation and create real emotional suffering. So learning to recognize and consciously separate that cliche, that mental overlay from the actual facts, that's incredibly freeing. It gives you back energy.
And that idea of mental coloring links straight into identity, doesn't it? How we see ourselves.
Yeah.
Your sources argue that self-identity isn't fixed, like eye color. It's described as a fluid, cognitive, emotional construct. It can change.
Which immediately leads to a really powerful question. If identity is fluid, can we intentionally reshape it to build motivation? And the answer seems to be a clear yes. Your sources point out that people who are willing to look a bit awkward or, inexperienced when learning something new, they actually tend to learn faster and perform better in the long run.
Why is that?
Because that willingness comes from a flexible identity. Instead of a fixed thought like, I'm terrible at public speaking, you can shift it slightly. You reframe it internally to, I haven't learned the skills for public speaking yet.
The yet.
That little word. It seems small, but it reframes the whole thing. It frees up so much mental energy that was tied up in judgment.
So that's the growth mindset idea right there. Yeah, focusing on learning, on the process, rather than just performance and fixed outcomes. And believing we are responsible for our results, that internal locus of control, that's another key piece for keeping motivation going. Okay, this is all really insightful, but let's get practical. How do we actually do this stuff day to day? Your sources have some great low willpower strategies. Let's tackle the big one first.
Yeah.
Procrastination. We all do it.
Right. And procrastination is so often just written off as laziness, but it's much more complex. Your sources describe it as this cognitive conflict happening within our very limited working memory. You're basically juggling what you feel you should do with what you want to do right now. These desires compete.
Like a mental tug of war.
Exactly. And just trying to use willpower to force the should often backfires because our working memory just gets overloaded. We feel stuck, paralyzed.
Okay, so what are the smart ways around this mental gridlock? Your sources have several powerful, almost sneaky strategies that don't rely on brute force willpower. First, do the next best thing. I like this one. Instead of forcing the huge, scary task, find a smaller, totally doable alternative. Like if the kitchen is a disaster, maybe just putting a few cups in the sink counts as the next best thing.
Yes, it lowers the barrier to entry, reduces that initial resistance, and crucially, it starts building momentum. Even tiny momentum helps.
Makes sense. Second, chunk tasks, realistically, breaking big projects down.
Right, into meaningful, manageable pieces, not just random small bits, but chunks that feel like progress. So instead of the terrifying 1,000-hour thesis, focus on finishing, say, 3 pages today, or one specific section. It makes the goal feel achievable.
Okay, third, harness the doorway effect. This one kind of blew my mind. I mean, I know I've walked into a room and completely forgotten why I went in there.
We all have.
And then I remember as soon as I leave. So physically moving through a doorway or just changing rooms can actually reset your working memory and help with these mental conflicts.
It seems so. It's a known cognitive quirk, like a little mental palate cleanser, so you can actually use it intentionally. Feeling stuck on a problem, get up, walk into another room, maybe grab a glass of water, come back. It can help break that mental loop.
Simple, but potentially powerful.
Yeah.
Okay, what else?
And fourth, just general working memory awareness. Being conscious that your mind has limited bandwidth for holding conflicting goals or desires. So keep your immediate plans relatively simple and realistic to avoid that feeling of overwhelm. And here's a subtle but important point from the sources. Sometimes aiming for a super tiny first step can actually increase resistance because the perceived benefit feels too small for the effort.
Oh, interesting. So just write one sentence might backfire.
It can for some tasks, often aiming for a meaningful but still manageable chunk, something that feels substantial enough to be worth doing but not scary that hits the sweet spot. It provides a better perceived cost-benefit ratio, which can actually boost motivation more effectively.
Got it. Find that Goldilocks chunk size. These are great for tackling tasks. But what about those deeper shifts? Identity, perception. How do we work on those? Your sources have tools for that too, right?
Yes, absolutely. To help with those identity shifts, physical and mental grounding practices are really key. They create the right internal state. This includes things like consciously practicing posture alignment. Sitting or standing tall, straight spine, neck, head aligned seems basic, but it matters. Combine that with deep breathing exercises, slowing down the breath, and some sources even mention centering chants, like using Om to help create a calm, open, more receptive mental
Okay,
space.
so get grounded first. Then what?
Once you're in that more grounded state, you can then work on observing and letting go of limiting identity beliefs. The trick is to recognize them for what they are. Mental abstractions, just thoughts, not concrete reality. So you consciously practice shifting from I am bad at X to I haven't learned X yet. That yet again. You also practice just noticing factual reality versus your mental commentary about it. Maybe even write them down side by side. Fact, email not answered. Interpretation, they're ignoring me because they're mad. Seeing it written down helps separate them.
Right, separating fact from story.
Okay.
And for building that intrinsic motivation, the kind that feels more self-generated, your sources lay out a clear path there too, moving beyond just reacting.
Yes, it's a multi-step process. First, generate options. This is about shifting from being reactive to proactive. Actively create choices for yourself. Don't just drift into weekend plans. Consciously list out a few things you genuinely want to do. Even small choices build that autonomy muscle.
Okay, make choices.
Yeah.
Step 2.
Second, anticipate outcomes. Mentally walk through the likely consequences or experiences of each option. This process itself activates your internal motivational circuits without needing to fixate just on external rewards. It's about internal engagement. Third, plan and act despite resistance. And this is crucial. Expect some resistance. Expect those negative thoughts like, oh, what's the point? Or this is too hard.
Why expect them?
Because it's often your old external motivation circuits pushing back against the shift towards internal drive. Acknowledge them, but persist with your plan anyway. Fourth, reflect regularly. Set aside quiet time to think about what worked, what didn't, both successes and failures, but without beating yourself up. No judgment. This reflection is vital for recalibrating and strengthening that internal system over time. And finally, fifth, shift your locus of control internally. Actively cultivate the belief that you are fundamentally responsible for your results. Move away from blaming external factors or other people. This internal locus is strongly tied to higher intrinsic motivation.
Okay, that's a really solid framework. Now, there was one more really profound idea in these sources near the end. Something about karmic ties. It suggests that sometimes lack of motivation isn't that we don't want to do things, but that our motivation is somehow blocked.
Exactly. It's a fascinating concept. The idea is that every uncompleted task, every unresolved intention, maybe every mistake we haven't made peace with, each creates kind of karmic tie. Think of it like invisible threads that mentally bind you and subtly drain your energy, your focus.
So they pile up.
They pile up, and over time, this accumulation leads to feeling overwhelmed, scattered, even paralyzed. You want to move forward, but you feel stuck.
The sources use an interesting analogy from Alcoholics Anonymous, making amends. It's not just saying sorry. It's about resolving past stuff to free up energy for recovery.
Precisely. It's about clearing the decks. So the practical step here is to settle your past. This means actively working on mending broken relationships where possible, offering sincere apologies, dealing with unfinished business that's nagging at you. It's about lightening that psychological load. So when you feel profoundly stuck or paralyzed, the answer might not just be to push harder on the current task. Part of the answer might lie in looking back and resolving some of those old, lingering issues that are holding your energy hostage. It's a more holistic approach.
Wow. Okay, so wrapping this all up, what does this mean for you listening right now? We've covered a lot. The limits of working memory, the huge power of perception, those competing intrinsic and extrinsic circuits, even the weight of unresolved ties. It's all connected.
I think the big takeaway is that sustainable, real motivation isn't about finding a magic trick or just having more willpower than other people. It's about achieving a deep internal alignment. understanding your emotions, consciously working with your perceptions and identity, making sure those core needs for autonomy, competence, and connection are being met. And sometimes it even involves doing that quiet, maybe difficult work of clearing out old baggage that's draining your energy without you even realizing it.
Yeah, this deep dive really shows that by understanding these mechanisms, these deeper forces, and using these kinds of integrated strategies, you really can shift from feeling stuck, always pushing against yourself, to cultivating a more effortless, self-driven motivation, the kind that actually lasts. We really hope digging into your sources like this has given you some powerful new ways to think about it and some concrete steps you can try.
Absolutely. And maybe just a final thought for you to mull over. If motivation really boils down to an emotional and perceptual state, and if our identity truly is fluid, what's just one limiting self belief you carry around? Maybe an I am statement that you could experiment with challenging today just by reframing it, even just in your own head, from I am to I haven't learned yet.